I've often heard people say that life can change in the blink of an eye, or with the ring of a phone, or even with a single sentence you didn't expect to hear. For me, it wasn't a phone call, and it wasn't a dramatic knock at the door. It was something so ordinary, so seemingly harmless, that it still unsettles me when I think back on it. It was just a voice message, a simple notification, a red dot glowing on my phone screen. I remember squinting at it, confused at first. My daughter rarely left me voice messages. She was more of a texter, quick, clipped responses filled with emojis, or sometimes no response at all when she was too busy with her husband, with her work, or with her life. But that morning, I woke up to her name on my screen with the little icon showing she had sent a voice note. At first, I smiled. Maybe it was a happy accident. Maybe she had meant to say good morning or share a funny story with me. I was sipping my tea, still half asleep, when I tapped play. And that's when my whole world shifted. The first few seconds were normal enough, just her voice, that familiar rhythm that once comforted me when she was a child. But then the words came, words that weren't meant for me, words that seemed to cut into me like glass shards. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending. He still thinks I'm happy, but I'm not. Every time I see her face, I just... And then she trailed off, her voice cracking slightly. I froze, my mug covering midair. At first, my mind tried to rationalize it. Surely, she was talking about someone else. Surely, this was just a fragment of a bigger conversation. But the more I replayed it, the more the implications grew heavier, darker. She wasn't talking to me. She wasn't even talking about me, at least, not intentionally. That message had been meant for her husband. And from the sound of it, it contained a truth she hadn't wanted anyone else, especially me, to hear. My heart started racing. I tapped the phone again, replayed it, searching for clues in the pauses, in the catch of her breath, in the trembling tone that told me more than the words did. Who was she talking about? What was she hiding? And most importantly, why did I feel such a sinking dread, as if the her she mentioned could only be me? I wish I could say I brushed it off, that I laughed at the misunderstanding and went on with my day. But no. That message planted itself deep in my mind like a seed of doubt, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more it sprouted. The rest of that morning is a blur. I remember pacing the living room, my tea gone cold, the message replaying over and over. I kept thinking of her wedding day, how she had looked so radiant, clutching her husband's hand as if nothing in the world could shake her. I thought of the way she used to confide in me when she was little, spilling secrets about playground fights or first crushes, secrets that were safe with me. And yet, here I was, on the outside of her life, listening to a message that wasn't meant for my ears, and realizing there was a whole world of her thoughts and feelings that I no longer had access to. It hurt. It hurt more than I could put into words. But along with the hurt came something else, curiosity, unease, and a creeping fear of what I might uncover if I dared to dig deeper. For hours, I went back and forth in my mind. Should I confront her right away? Should I pretend I never heard it? Should I give her the benefit of the doubt, assuming it was all just a misunderstanding? Every possibility carried its own weight. If I confronted her, I risked pushing her further away, maybe even breaking the fragile bond we still had. If I ignored it, I'd be living with the torment of unanswered questions. And if I assumed the best, I risked fooling myself while something darker lurked beneath the surface. By the afternoon, I realized something important. That message wasn't just about her, it was about me, too. It was about my role in her life, about what she truly thought of me but never dared to say aloud. And once that thought took root, it wouldn't let me go. I started replaying not just the message but our entire history, moments of laughter, moments of distance, the times she leaned on me and the times she pushed me away. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the nights I stayed awake worrying about her, the countless ways I had tried to be there even when she made it clear she didn't need me. Was I blind? Had I missed something all along? The house felt colder that day, the silence heavier than usual. I looked at old photographs on the wall, her as a baby, grinning toothlessly at me, her at graduation, cap crooked but eyes shining, her at her wedding, smiling but perhaps, now that I looked again, with a hint of something forced. Was it all an act? And then came the most dangerous thought of all. If she's hiding this from her husband, what else is she hiding? That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the message echoing in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice, tired, conflicted, almost desperate. By morning, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. That one mistaken message had cracked open a door I didn't even realize existed. Behind it was a truth I hadn't been prepared to face, but now that I'd glimpsed it, I couldn't unsee it. The question was no longer whether I'd pursue the truth. The question was, how far was I willing to go to find it? And as much as I dreaded the answer, I also knew one thing for certain. This story was only beginning. The next day, I tried to live as if nothing had happened. I forced myself to fold laundry, to water the plants, to sweep the kitchen floor. But every mundane task seemed to circle back to that one message, like my mind was tethered to it by an invisible chain. Her voice lingered in my ears. That crack in her tone, the way she trailed off, like even she was afraid of her own truth. It replayed in my head with every swish of the broom, every clang of dishes in the sink. I tried humming to drown it out, but even my own humming seemed hollow, like I was trying too hard to pretend. The hardest part was the silence that followed. She hadn't called. She hadn't texted. There was no follow-up, no accidental oops, and Mom, I didn't mean to send that to you. Nothing. Just silence, as though the message had never existed. But it did. I had it. Proof of something unspoken, something raw. By mid-morning, I found myself scrolling through my phone, staring at her contact picture. My finger hovered over the call button, trembling. Should I ask her outright? Sweetheart, I heard your message. What's going on? But fear held me back. Fear of hearing the truth I wasn't ready to accept. Fear that if I confronted her, she might deny it, or worse, cut me out entirely. I locked the phone and set it down, only to pick it up again moments later. The internal tug of war was exhausting. I wanted answers, but I also wanted to protect myself from the sting of rejection I suspected was coming. Instead, I played the message again. This time, I listened not just to the words but to the spaces between them. Her breathing, shallow and quick. The little hitch in her throat. The way her voice dropped when she said, "Every time I see her face." I swallowed hard. Was she talking about me? That thought made my chest ache. I thought of the last time we'd seen each other, a Sunday lunch at her house. She'd made pasta, her husband had opened a bottle of wine, and we had sat there, exchanging polite conversation. It wasn't tense, but it wasn't warm either. I remember her eyes darting toward him whenever I spoke, like she was checking his reaction before deciding her own. Did she see me as an intruder in her marriage? As a shadow looming over her life? The questions dug deeper than I wanted them to. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I thought back even further, to her teenage years. She had been so fiery then, quick to challenge me, quick to push back. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion, but maybe it had been more. Maybe it had been resentment building brick by brick, resentment I had been too busy or too hopeful to see. I thought of her wedding. She had asked me to sit 2 rows back instead of in the front. She'd said it was because of space, but now I wondered if it had been about appearances. Did she think I wasn't presentable enough? Not polished enough to sit where everyone could see? The memory made me wince. I had smiled that day, proud and glowing, hiding the sting of disappointment. But perhaps, deep down, she hadn't been hiding anything at all. Perhaps the cracks had already been showing, and I had been too blinded by love to notice. I poured myself another cup of tea, but my hands shook so badly I nearly spilled it. Sitting there at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, I realized I couldn't carry this weight alone. I needed perspective. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister, Elaine. Elaine has always been the sharper one, the one who could read between the lines, the one who never sugarcoated. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but warm. "Hello?" "It's me," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. She's always been able to sense it. I hesitated, then spilled everything. The message, the words, the way it felt like they were daggers aimed right at me. I repeated it as best as I could remember, my throat tightening as I spoke. Elaine was silent for a moment. Then she exhaled sharply. "Well," she said, "that's heavy." "I don't know what to do," I whispered. I don't even know if she was talking about me. But it feels like it. "Listen," Elaine said firmly. "Don't jump to conclusions. Maybe she meant someone else. A coworker. A friend. You know how dramatic people get when they're venting to their partners." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to cling to that sliver of hope. But my gut told me otherwise. "Still," she continued, softening her tone, "if it was about you, then maybe this is your chance to clear the air. Maybe she's been holding on to feelings she hasn't expressed. You could give her the chance to say them." Her words sank in, but instead of comfort, they left me more unsettled. Did I really want to hear everything my daughter thought of me? Could I handle it if the truth was as cruel as my imagination painted it? That night, I dreamed of her. She was little again, running into my arms after school, her backpack bouncing. She smelled of crayons and chalk dust, and she was smiling, that wide, uninhibited smile children have before the world teaches them to hide their emotions. I woke up in tears. The next morning, I stared at the message again. Still unopened, still sitting there like a ticking time bomb. I had listened to it enough times to memorize it, yet I couldn't bring myself to delete it. And then it happened, another message came through. This time, I nearly dropped the phone in panic. My heart raced as I saw her name flash again. Another voice note. My fingers fumbled as I tapped to listen. "Hey, babe," she began, this one clearly for her husband. "Sorry about the last message. I didn't mean to sound so dramatic. It's just, sometimes being around her makes me feel small. Like it'll never be enough." Her words sliced through me. There was no denying it this time. She was talking about me. I sat there frozen, the confirmation pressing down like a weight on my chest. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my imagination. She had said it outright. Being around me made her feel small. I felt my breath catch. All the sacrifices, the nights I stayed up worrying, the money I saved, the love I poured into her, it all collapsed in that single moment. She didn't see me as a mother who had given everything she could. She saw me as someone who diminished her, someone who made her feel inadequate. It was the cruelest revelation of my life. I set the phone down slowly, my hands trembling, my mind spinning. What do you do when the person you love most in this world reveals that your very presence feels like a burden? I didn't have the answer then. But I knew this much. Pretending nothing happened was no longer an option. The day after I accidentally heard that voice message from my daughter, nothing in my world felt the same. It was as if a glass wall had shattered inside me, and now every step I took was over sharp, cutting edges. The words echoed in my ears every time I closed my eyes, her laughter, her lowered tone, the way she spoke to her husband like I was a nuisance, like I was dead weight in her otherwise perfect life. I replayed it more than once, even though I told myself not to. My hands trembled as I scrolled to that saved message in my phone, my stomach tight with dread. Each replay confirmed what I'd initially hoped was a mistake or misinterpretation. No, there was no misunderstanding. My daughter, the girl I raised, the one I carried in my arms when she scraped her knee or cried in the night, thought of me as a burden. Worse, she didn't even have the courage to say it to my face. She shared it in confidence with her husband, and it slipped into my world like poison through a crack. I tried to go about my day as though nothing had changed. I watered the plants on my windowsill, humming faintly like I often did. But the notes came out brittle, breaking halfway through. I made my tea, pouring hot water over the bag, watching the leaves bleed their color as if they, too, were unraveling under heat. Every ordinary motion felt hollow now. For the first 2 days, I didn't say a word to her. Not even a hint. I answered her routine calls in the same way I always had, careful to mask my voice. When she asked, "How are you doing, Mom?" I answered lightly, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just keeping busy." But inside, the truth bubbled and boiled. I wanted to shout, "How dare you? After everything I've sacrificed for you?" Yet, the words stuck in my throat like thorns. At night, I sat awake staring at the ceiling. My mind wandered through old memories, holding her hand on her first day of school, listening to her tell me about her first crush, hugging her tight when she didn't get into the college she wanted. I had always been her anchor, her safe place. How had I become the very weight she wanted to cut loose? There's a unique pain in realizing that your child, the person you gave so much to, sees you as disposable. By the third day, she called again, and this time I couldn't keep my voice entirely steady. She was rambling on about a work dinner she had with her husband, how exhausting it was, and how she needed a break. My responses were short. That's nice. I see. Finally, she paused. Mom, are you okay? You sound different. I hesitated. My heart raced. The words sat on my tongue, but I swallowed them back. Just tired, I lied. Didn't sleep well. She accepted it too quickly, as though relieved not to have to dig deeper. That, too, stung. I realized then that if I waited for her to notice, to care enough to press, I'd be waiting forever. The responsibility was mine to confront her. I didn't want to explode in anger. Anger rarely mends, it tears further apart. So I planned. I rehearsed in my head the way I would bring it up, calmly, factually, but with all the weight of truth. You sent me a voice message by mistake, I imagined myself saying. I heard what you said about me. What would she do? Deny it? Apologize? Double down? I ran through the scenarios like chess moves, preparing myself for every counter. But no amount of rehearsing could prepare me for the real thing. The following weekend, she invited me over for dinner. I almost declined, afraid I'd crack in her presence, but something inside me whispered, "This is your chance." I arrived with a casserole dish in my hands, as I often did, the smell of baked chicken and herbs filling her kitchen when I placed it on the counter. She hugged me, perfunctory, distracted already by setting the table. Her husband greeted me. Warmly, as he always did. If he knew what she had said about me, he didn't let on. In fact, his kindness made it sting more, because it highlighted how unnecessary her cruelty had been. We sat down, ate, made small talk. I barely tasted the food. My fork felt heavy in my hand, my chest tight with the words waiting to leap out. Finally, when the plates were pushed aside and the conversation lulled, I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice firmer than I felt, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important." She glanced up, surprised. "Of course, Mom. What's wrong?" I looked straight into her eyes. "A few days ago, you sent me a voice message by mistake. I don't think you realized it went to me instead of your husband." Her face drained of color instantly. Her fork clattered against the plate. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, though her eyes flickered with recognition. "I heard what you said," I continued. My hands were steady now, even as my heart pounded. "I heard you say I was a burden. That you wished I wasn't around so much. That I was ruining things for you." Silence blanketed the room. Her husband froze, looking between us, his mouth slightly open. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Mom, she faltered, tears forming. "It wasn't. I didn't mean it like that." I held up a hand. "Don't lie to me. Don't pretend I misheard. I know what I heard. The question is, why? Why would you say that about me?" Her tears spilled over then. I was frustrated. I was venting. It was a private conversation, and I never meant for you to hear it. Her husband cleared his throat, quietly excusing himself to give us space. I'd barely noticed him leave. My eyes stayed on my daughter. "Do you realize what those words did to me?" I asked softly, my voice trembling now not from fear but from hurt. "Do you realize how it feels to know the child you raised thinks of you that way?" She sobbed harder, reaching for me across the table. "I'm sorry, Mom. I swear, I didn't mean it. I was just overwhelmed, and I said things I didn't truly feel." I looked at her hand but didn't take it. This was the moment I had dreaded and anticipated all at once. Her apology sounded desperate, but was it genuine? Or was it only because she had been caught? In that pause, something shifted inside me. I realized I had spent too much of my life absorbing pain quietly, forgiving too quickly, minimizing my own hurt so others wouldn't feel discomfort. This time, I wouldn't brush it away. "You may think it was just venting," I said, my voice stronger now, "but words have power. They reveal what sits beneath the surface. And whether you admit it or not, a part of you resents me. That's something we can't just erase with an 'I'm sorry.'" She cried harder, insisting, "No, Mom, please don't think that. I love you. I need you." I finally stood, pushing my chair back. "Then prove it," I told her. "Not with words. With actions. Because right now, what I heard tells me otherwise." I left that night with my casserole dish tucked under my arm, my daughter still crying at the table. My heart ached, but it also felt strangely lighter. For the first time in a long time, I had spoken my truth without softening it to make someone else comfortable. The days that followed were strained. She texted me apologies, long paragraphs about how she hadn't meant what she said. I responded politely, but I didn't rush to reassure her like I used to. I let the weight of her words sit with her, just as they had sat with me. Because sometimes, growth requires discomfort. And if she was ever going to truly understand the depth of her betrayal, she had to feel the silence of my distance. The weeks after I confronted my daughter about the voice message were some of the most complicated of my life. On one hand, I felt a measure of relief. Finally, I had spoken the truth instead of swallowing my hurt. On the other hand, the rift between us widened in ways I had not anticipated. The confrontation hadn't closed the wound. It had simply exposed it to the light, raw and unhealed. I kept to myself more than usual. The phone, which once buzzed daily with her updates or casual chatter, now stayed silent for long stretches. When her name did flash across the screen, it was usually accompanied by long, desperate apologies, often sent late at night. She pleaded for me to forgive her, to understand that she hadn't truly meant what she'd said in that voice message. But the thing about truth is that once it's heard, it cannot be unheard. Once spoken, words live on like ghosts in the corners of every room. About 3 weeks after the confrontation, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. My daughter's handwriting was scrawled across the front, and inside was an invitation, a family gathering she and her husband were hosting. It was described as a celebration of new beginnings. They had just moved into a bigger house, and this was their way of christening it with family and friends. My first instinct was to decline. Why put myself through the discomfort of being in the same room with her when our relationship was still cracked down the middle? But something inside me hesitated. Perhaps this was her way of extending an olive branch. Perhaps she wanted me there as a sign that she was ready to mend things in front of everyone. Or perhaps it was simply a performance, to show the outside world that our bond was unshakable, even when it was barely holding together at the seams. Either way, I knew I needed to be there. Not for her. For me. In the days leading up to the gathering, I swung between nerves and resolve. I thought about what to wear, and eventually settled on a soft navy dress that had always made me feel dignified but not flashy. That morning, I brushed my hair with deliberate care, applied a touch of lipstick, and studied my reflection in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't see a mother who had been betrayed. I saw a woman who had endured storms, who carried scars with quiet grace, who had survived every attempt to break her spirit. That image gave me strength. I told myself I wouldn't cause a scene. I wouldn't humiliate her in front of others. But if the subject arose, if the tension found its way to the surface, I would not shrink back into silence either. This time, silence would not protect me. Her new home was impressive. A 2-story house with polished floors, high ceilings, and large windows that flooded the space with light. Guests milled about, glasses of wine in hand, laughter echoing against the walls. When I stepped through the doorway, heads turned, and I was greeted warmly by cousins, aunts, and old friends. My daughter approached, her smile wide but strained. "Mom," she said softly, hugging me quickly. "I'm so glad you came." Her husband was more genuine. "It means a lot that you're here," he told me, placing a hand on my shoulder. I smiled politely, but inside, my emotions churned. I could sense the undercurrent, the unspoken tension. The wound between us was invisible, but it filled the room like smoke. Throughout the evening, I tried to engage with others, joining conversations about work, children, vacations. But no matter where I turned, I felt my daughter's eyes on me, watchful, nervous, as though she feared I might expose everything right then and there. It was during dinner that the breaking point arrived. We were all seated around a long table, plates piled high with food, glasses clinking. The conversation turned to family, the importance of staying close, supporting one another, never letting distance or resentment get in the way. One of my cousins raised a toast. "To family," she said warmly, lifting her glass. "Through thick and thin, we're always there for each other." The irony of her words sliced through me like a knife. I looked across the table at my daughter, who smiled tightly, her knuckles wide as she clutched her fork. And before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "Funny thing about family," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to silence the chatter around me. Sometimes the ones you trust most are the ones who wound you the deepest. The room went still. My daughter's eyes widened in horror. "Mom," she hissed under her breath. "Please, not here." But I didn't stop. I wasn't planning to say anything tonight, I continued, setting down my fork. But since we're all talking about family and honesty, perhaps it's time the truth came out. Gasps rippled through the table. All eyes were on me now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet firmness in my tone was enough. Not long ago, I received a voice message by mistake. It was from my daughter. I paused, looking directly at her. In it, she spoke about me as though I were nothing more than a burden. She wished I weren't around so much. She made it clear she saw me as an inconvenience to her life. A stunned silence followed. My daughter's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, stop, please," she whispered, but the damage was already done. The relatives around the table shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shock and sympathy. Her husband sat rigid, his jaw clenched, as though he'd known this moment was inevitable. I took a steadying breath. I have kept this to myself for weeks, trying to process the pain of those words. I confronted her privately, hoping we could mend things quietly. But tonight, listening to all this talk about family loyalty and closeness, I realized silence only protects the one who did wrong. It does nothing for the one who was wronged. My daughter broke then, sobbing openly. "I didn't mean it." She cried. "I was stressed, I was venting, I never wanted you to hear it." I shook my head gently. But I did hear it. And once words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. They reveal truths, even the ones we try to deny. The table remained frozen. Some relatives looked at me with sympathy, others at my daughter with pity and disapproval. Her husband finally spoke. "She made a mistake," he said quietly. "A mistake that hurt deeply. But if nothing else, let's not forget that it takes courage to confront pain instead of hiding it." I appreciated his words, though they didn't erase the ache. I didn't stay much longer after that. I excused myself, hugging a few relatives on my way out. My daughter tried to follow me to the door, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, please," she begged. "I know I hurt you, but don't hate me. I can't stand the thought of losing you." I turned to her, my voice steady but firm. "I don't hate you. I never could. But I won't ignore what you did either. If you truly want to mend this, it will take time, honesty, and change. Not just words." With that, I left. The night air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That evening marked a turning point, not just in my relationship with my daughter, but in my own understanding of myself. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to put others first, to bury my own hurt for the sake of peace. But standing up, speaking the truth in front of everyone, had been my way of reclaiming my dignity. It wasn't about shaming her. It was about finally refusing to carry the weight of her betrayal alone. As I walked to my car, the night sky stretched wide and starry above me. I knew the road ahead with my daughter would be long and uncertain. But at least now, the lies and silences had been broken. At least now, the truth had been spoken. When I left that gathering, I knew the evening would live in people's memories for years. Families have long histories of secrets, some whispered, some buried, but once they come to light, there is no tucking them back into the shadows. I had spoken aloud what many parents in my position might have swallowed. I knew my daughter would never forget it, nor would those who had sat at that table watching her crumble beneath the weight of her own words. But what I didn't anticipate was how quickly the ripples would spread beyond that dining room. The first few days after the confrontation were eerily quiet. My phone barely rang. The cousins and aunts who usually checked in every week kept their distance, perhaps unsure what to say. My daughter didn't call at all. The only message she sent was short and pained, "I need time. Please don't reach out until I'm ready." I honored her request. It wasn't easy. Every instinct in me wanted to pick up the phone, to soothe, to mend, but I had promised myself that this time I would not be the one to smooth over the broken pieces while cutting myself on the edges. Instead, I leaned into my solitude. I took long walks in the morning, cooked meals in silence, and journaled late into the night. I found myself revisiting old letters and photographs, reminding myself that once, long ago, our relationship had been filled with tenderness and joy. That reminder was both comforting and painful, a bittersweet testament to how much we had lost. It didn't take long for word of what had happened to spread. Families are like villages. Stories travel fast, sometimes faster than the people they're about. When I attended church the following Sunday, I felt the weight of eyes on me as I walked down the aisle. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with curiosity. A few, perhaps, with judgment. After the service, one woman approached me, her voice low. "You did the right thing," she said, patting my hand. "Too many of us suffer in silence, pretending everything is fine. But you spoke your truth." Another friend wasn't as kind. "Family matters should stay within family," she said firmly. "Airing things out like that only brings shame." Her words stung, but I realized they came from a mindset I had long struggled against. The belief that silence is noble, that keeping appearances is more important than addressing harm. I had lived that way for too long. I was no longer willing to. Eventually, the silence between my daughter and me broke. She called me late one evening, her voice trembling. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know how to." face anyone anymore. Everyone knows. I feel like my life is falling apart. I took a deep breath. Your life isn't falling apart, I said gently. But you're being forced to face something you'd rather not, the consequences of your words. She sobbed quietly on the other end. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was frustrated, overwhelmed, and I said things I shouldn't have. Now it feels like everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. You're not a monster, I told her. But you hurt me deeply. And healing doesn't come from excuses. It comes from accountability. There was a long pause. How do I even begin to fix this? She finally asked. By showing me, not telling me, that you're willing to change, I replied. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Meanwhile, my extended family found themselves divided. Some sided with me, saying I had every right to expose what happened. Others believed I had been too harsh, that a private matter had no place at a public gathering. A cousin even called me one afternoon. Auntie, I love you, but you embarrassed her. Do you realize how hard that must have been for her? Yes, I answered simply. But do you realize how hard it was for me to hear my only daughter talk about me like I was a burden she couldn't wait to get rid of? Pain doesn't disappear just because it's hidden. That conversation left me shaking, but also resolute. I wasn't going to apologize for speaking my truth. Not this time. Amidst all the chaos, there was one person who surprised me, my son-in-law. He called me a week after the gathering, his tone measured but sincere. I want to thank you, he said. Not for what happened that night, because, truthfully, it was difficult for all of us, but for forcing a conversation we should have had long ago. I blinked in surprise. What do you mean? He sighed. Your daughter has a habit of bottling things up until they spill out in the worst way. She vents to me, but rarely addresses things directly with you. It's unfair to both of you. Maybe now she'll learn to face things head on. His words gave me a glimmer of hope. For all the tension, maybe something good could still come from the wreckage. While my daughter wrestled with her guilt and shame, I focused on something I had neglected for too long, myself. I began attending a seniors writing group at the local library. There, I met others who carried their own family wounds, estrangements, betrayals, regrets. Sharing our stories helped me feel less alone. One afternoon, I read aloud a piece I had written about the night of the gathering. The group listened intently, and when I finished, one woman nodded and said that was powerful. Painful, yes, but powerful. You reminded us that silence isn't always strength. Those words stayed with me. For so long, I had believed strength meant enduring without complaint. Now, I realized strength could also mean daring to speak when silence suffocates you. As weeks turned into months, my daughter and I began to take small steps toward reconciliation. She would call me, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to apologize again. At first, I kept my responses guarded, not ready to be swept back into false comfort. But gradually, I noticed her tone shifting. She wasn't just saying sorry anymore. She was listening, asking how I felt, acknowledging the depth of my hurt instead of minimizing it. One day, she surprised me by inviting me to lunch. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. I know I can't undo what I said, she whispered. But I want to prove to you that I see your worth, that I need you in my life. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet. But it was a start. Looking back, I realized the aftermath wasn't just about the damage, it was about the rebuilding. The truth had shattered our relationship, yes, but it had also stripped away the illusions. There was no going back to pretending everything was fine. And maybe that was the gift hidden inside the pain. The fallout forced us to confront things we'd long ignored, her tendency to speak carelessly, my tendency to stay silent for the sake of peace. Both had been toxic in their own ways. Both needed to change if our relationship was ever to heal. By the end of that year, the sting of the confrontation had dulled. My daughter and I weren't fully healed, but we were no longer drifting apart. We were facing each other, acknowledging the wound, and beginning the slow, painstaking process of stitching it closed. The community eventually moved on too. Gossip faded, replaced by new dramas, new stories. But for me, the lesson remained clear. The price of silence is too high when it comes at the cost of your own dignity. I had lost a part of my relationship with my daughter, yes. But I had gained something too, the courage to demand better, not only from her but from myself. And that, I realized, was the true aftermath, not just of a confrontation, but of years of unspoken pain finally finding a voice. The weeks after the courtroom dust settled moved slowly, as if life itself were pausing to let me catch my breath. I woke each morning with the faint taste of relief in my mouth, tempered by the lingering bitterness of everything I had endured. Victory in a legal sense was one thing, but healing, the deeper, more fragile kind, was a whole other journey. I had triumphed in defending my name and dignity, but my heart still carried the ache of betrayal. That single voice message, the one that started this entire chain of events, echoed in my memory like a refrain. I would sometimes find myself replaying it in my mind, not because I wanted to relive the hurt, but because it had become a symbol. A symbol of everything I hadn't wanted to believe but had to face. My daughter's sharp words, her cruel laughter, her cold dismissal of me. At first, I tried to hate her for it. Truly, I did. Hate seemed like the only shield strong enough to protect me from the pain. But hate is heavy, and it poisons the one who carries it. Slowly, almost against my will, I began to let go, not to excuse her, but to release myself. That message became less of a dagger and more of a reminder. It reminded me of how far I had come, how strong I had been forced to become, and how even the deepest cuts could heal into scars that told the story. Something else I hadn't anticipated was the way people in the community rallied around me. At church, women who had once only nodded politely stopped to clasp my hands. Neighbors I barely knew brought casseroles and pies to my door. One woman from down the street left me a handwritten note that said, "Your courage reminds me of my mother. Thank you for not letting them silence you." That simple sentence stayed with me. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a shared cautionary tale, a lesson to others that silence in the face of disrespect breeds nothing but pain, and that speaking up, even when your own blood turns against you, can carve out a path to dignity. It was humbling, in a way, to become a symbol for others. I had never asked for that role. I was just a mother, a woman trying to survive. But in my struggle, others found reflection, and in my small victories, they found courage. If you're wondering whether my daughter ever reached out after it all, the answer is no, at least not immediately. Weeks turned into months, and her silence remained as loud as her words on that recording. There were times I caught myself staring at the phone, half expecting it to light up with her name. When it didn't, a hollow pit would form in my chest. Yet with each day that passed, I found myself less consumed by waiting. I began to accept that reconciliation, if it ever came, would be on her terms. And maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't come at all. That realization was painful, but it was also liberating. It allowed me to stop holding my life hostage for an apology that might never arrive. I think that's one of the hardest truths a parent can face. The understanding that no matter how much love you pour into a child, you cannot control what they do with it. When I looked back at the woman I had been before this ordeal, the one who thought her life would simply fade quietly into the background, I hardly recognized her anymore. I was no longer just a mother or grandmother who sacrificed silently. I had become someone who stood up, even when it meant standing alone. This, I realized, was my legacy. Not the voice message, not the betrayal, not even the courtroom battle, but the resilience that followed. I started writing more in my journal, recording not only my pain but also my small triumphs. The first time I laughed again without bitterness, the first night I slept through without waking in tears, the first morning I looked in the mirror and saw not a victim but a survivor. One day, maybe long after I'm gone, someone might read those words. Perhaps a granddaughter, or even a stranger. And maybe they'll understand that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about learning how to piece yourself back together in new, stronger patterns. Though my daughter stayed silent, my son eventually reached out. His call was hesitant, his words stumbling, but in them I heard a flicker of remorse. He said he hadn't known how cruel his sister had been, hadn't realized the depth of my hurt until the truth came out in court. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. We met for coffee a week later, and for the first time in years, I felt a small thread of family weaving itself back into my life. I don't know if the bond with my daughter will ever mend, but I do know that not all ties were severed. And that, too, was a kind of victory. Looking back, there are lessons I wish I had learned sooner, truths I wish someone had told me. Silence enables cruelty. If I had spoken up earlier, maybe things wouldn't have escalated. But I also know it takes what it takes to reach a breaking point. Family is not defined by blood alone. It's defined by respect, care, and reciprocity. Without those, the title daughter or son is just a word. Dignity is worth fighting for. Even if you stand alone, even if your voice shakes, standing up for yourself is never wasted effort. Healing is not linear. Some days I felt strong, other days broken. Both were part of the process. These lessons are now etched into my bones. They are my compass for whatever years remain ahead. As I sit now, pen in hand, staring out at the garden where the seasons continue their endless cycle, I feel a quiet peace settling over me. The roses bloom despite storms, the birds return each spring despite the cold. Life, it seems, always finds a way forward. So too will I. I may never fully erase the sound of my daughter's laughter in that cruel voice message, but I can choose how I let it define me. And I choose this, to let it remind me of how deeply I can hurt, and yet how profoundly I can rise. The legacy I leave behind will not be one of bitterness or silence. It will be a legacy of endurance, of speaking when silenced, of finding strength in the unlikeliest of places. Perhaps one day, my daughter will look back and regret. Perhaps she won't. But either way, I will not let her choices write the ending of my story. That power belongs to me. And so I close this chapter not with anger, not with despair, but with a steady heart and a spirit that has weathered the storm. Because in the end, survival is not just about living, it's about living with truth, dignity, and the quiet kind of courage that no voice message, no betrayal, can ever take away.